Okay.
I'm thankful to Paola Vigano and thank you, Tommaso Pietropoli. I'm delighted to give this counter projects and coexistence lecture on the dialectical naturalism of Murray Bookchin. I've already been presented as the coordinator of Climate Alliance Italy and one of the founding members of the European network, the coordinator of the Fair of Practical Utopias, talking to you from a small city in central Italy, Città di Castello. Murray Bookchin was a teacher, a mentor, a friend of mine. We met in the early 70s and worked together until his death in 2006. I would like to start with two citations. The first one, human beings must intervene when a geosystem reaches a critical state. But nowadays, such intervention in nature has become more and more frequent. As a consequence, serious problems arise, leading to further interventions. Human activity becomes ubiquitous with all the risks which this entails. Often a vicious circle results as human intervention to resolve a problem further aggravates the situation. For example, many birds and insects which disappear due to synthetic agrotoxins are helpful for agriculture. Their disappearance will have to be compensated for by yet other techniques which may well prove harmful. A sober look at our world shows that the degree of human intervention, often in the service of business interests and consumerism, is actually making our Earth less rich and beautiful, even more limited and gray, even as technological advances and consumer goods continue to abound limitlessness. We seem to think that we can substitute an irreplaceable and irretrievable beauty with something which we have created ourselves. That's the first citation. Let's listen to this, the second one. To assume that science commands this vast nexus of organic and inorganic interrelationships in all its details is worse than arrogance. It is sheer stupidity. If unity in diversity forms one of the cardinal tenets of ecology, the wealth of biota that exists in a single acre of soil leads us to still another basic ecological tenet, the need to allow for a high degree of natural spontaneity. The compelling dictum, respect for nature, has concrete implications. To assume that our knowledge of this complex, richly textured and perpetually changing natural kaleidoscope of life forms lends itself to a degree of mastery that allows us free rein in manipulating the biosphere is sheer foolishness. They sound quite similar, those two citations. The first one is from Laudato Si, Pope Francis. The second one is from Murray Bookchin, Ecology of Freedom. And I will go into the relevance, into the role of Murray Bookchin in the contemporary ecological discourse. I will return to that subject at the end of this lecture. Murray Bookchin lived from 1921 to 2006. He grew up in the Bronx in New York. His family, he's from Jewish Russian background. His grandmother was a radical leftist. He joined at an early age, 14 years or so, the Young Communist League in 1940, and he still was only 19 years old. He decided that Stalinism stinks and became a Trotskyite. In the 40s, he worked in the automobile production in New Jersey in a foundry shop, became shop steward and union organizer, and in the following 10 years started to elaborate his theoretical thought that resulted in 1962 in the publication of Our Synthetic Environment, the same year that Rachel Carson published Our Silent Spring. In 1971, he publishes a collection of essays, Post-Scarcity Anarchism, and then in 1982, his magnum opus, The Ecology of Freedom. At the latest, with this book, The Ecology of Freedom, Murray Bookchin introduces social ecology in the modern ecological discourse. His concept of social ecology is based on the idea that natural evolution and social evolution are intertwined. How we should imagine the relationship between the natural and the social sphere has, of course, been an ongoing debate. And in the modern ecological discourse, I'm now not going to go back to Epicure, there have been thinkers or also activists like Aldo Leopold, who is known for his influential work in the field of environmental ethics and who argued for land ethic. He writes, conservation is a state of harmony between man and land. And he is famous for his sentence, think like a mountain, where he argues for a holistic view on where one stands in the entire ecosystem, to have a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of all elements. The Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss, whom you met already in Murray Bookchin's critique, if you read the article which I recommended for this session, Arne Næss is being credited with as the father of deep ecology, which he distinguishes from shallow ecology being the one that only deals with symptoms, fighting pollution or the depletion of resources. In deep ecology, on the contrary, every being, whether human, animal, or vegetable, has an equal right to life and to self-realization. He talks about organisms as knots in the biospherical net or field of intrinsic relations. And finally, and he too, you found a critique of Murray Bookchin of his writings, Friedrich Capra, who has written, a physicist and a systems theorist, who has written about the connections between ecology and systems thinking. His book, The Web of Life, explores the ecological and systemic principles that underlie both natural and social systems. In his view, the principles that govern natural systems, such as networks, cycles, flows of energy and matter, and dynamic balance, are also applicable to social systems. Both natural and social systems exhibit complexity, which means that the systems are not fully predictable and require an understanding that surpasses simple cause and effect. What holds true for natural systems, that interacting species evolve together, holds also true for social systems and their environments that are also connected in a logic of co-evolution. Within natural and social systems, the parts are nested, each in larger systems, an organism in an ecosystem, a family in a social system, and finally, interdependence. Just as ecological systems are characterized by a complex set of relationships where all parts are interdependent, social systems are similarly composed of individuals and groups who are interconnected and rely on each other for their well-being and the functioning of the system as a whole. I could continue with other contemporary thinkers and activists who have contributed to this discourse on the relationship between first and second nature. Vandana Shiva comes to mind, the Indian activist and in favor of biodiversity. or David Harvard, a Marxist geographer, who together with Margaret Meyer formulated the request of the right to the city. But let's turn to Murray Bookchin, who in his text, Thinking Ecologically, a Dialectical Approach, distinguishes his approach sharply from thinkers like Capra or Ness, considering their thinking on the relation between first and second nature, reductionist and metaphoric. Now, if with this kind of critique, of course, you take on a heavy load yourself, because you have to demonstrate that your thinking is not reductionist and not metaphoric, but that you have a organic, theoretically founded thought on that relationship. Now, I'm not going to go into further into his critique of what he considers an incoherent body of eco-philosophy. Let's try to understand his own dialectic approach. How is second nature derived from first nature organically? And how come he considers the domain of nature a ground for freedom? That's in our article on page 103. Bookchin starts his exposition of the dialectic naturalism with Hegel's well-known picture of the seed and its development. Hegel, in the lectures on the history of philosophy, writes in the introduction on development and uses the seed as an example. It is simple, nearly only a point, but contains already all the qualities, for example, of a tree, his trunk, his branches, the leaves, the color, the smell, the taste, etc. Nevertheless, is this simple seed not the tree itself? The manifold does not exist yet. And this Hegel considers essential, that there is something simple that contains the manifold, but does not yet exist for itself. Development means to enter into existence. The unity of the differentiated, here I'm quoting Hegel, of the seed and of that into which it has developed is a speculative concept. And speculation for Hegel obviously is a positive thing, where there are two and still one. So development for Hegel, and Murray Bookchin takes this up as a directed process, but it is not automatic or assured. There's no guarantee that the seed will develop into a tree. We are talking about potentiality. So Bookchin, in his dialectical naturalism, takes up this thought of development as the actualization of what is implicit in the potential, and writes, in the organic world, the metabolic activity of the simplest life forms constitutes the sense of self-identity, however germinal, from which nature acquires a rudimentary subjectivity. Nature acquires a rudimentary subjectivity. Here he develops further a thought he takes from Hans Jonas, who argues in The Phenomenon of Life towards philosophical biology. That's a series of articles he worked into a book which he wrote in the 40s, 50s of the last century. Hans Jonas, known for his main work, The Principle of Responsibility. In The Phenomenon of Life, towards a basic organisms exhibit a form of subjectivity because they display an inherent purposefulness, purposefulness, directiveness, subjectivity. They engage in activities directed towards the preservation of their own existence, which implies a kind of self from which this purposeful activity originates. For Jonas, the mere fact that an organism engages in self-sustaining processes implies that there is an interiority or subjective dimensions to it. From these embryonic expressions of subjectivities that arise from the organic structure and metabolic activities in simple organisms, we witness an evolution into ever more differentiated forms. So this minimal form of subjectivity is characterized by a teleological drive, meaning that the activities of even the simplest life forms are directed towards goals, primarily survival and reproduction, which is to be distinguished from the non-purposive physical processes observed in inanimate objects. The philosophy of Hans Jonas thus extends the realm of subjectivity beyond the human sphere, challenging the sharp dualism between matter and mind, and inviting a new ethical consideration for all forms of life based on the inherent value that comes from their subjective striving. And what Hans Jonas developed as a philosopher, and later then Lynn Margulis as a biologist, in recent experiments has been borne out, for example, with bacteria that are being offered nutrient solutions, which they like, which they which they metabolize with preference, and they receive that nutrient liquid for a few days, and then they are being offered another nutrient liquid, which is less, which they like less, and they stop. They don't metabolize. They stop metabolizing, waiting if there's something better to come. And of course, we must be very careful here not to that's going to be hard. Anthropomorphize, anthropomorphize the behavior of microbes. But what seems to be there is an expectation of future rewards, which stimulates moving away from a less attractive option. Organic evolution, Bookchin writes, is in a broad sense subjective insofar as life forms begin to exercise choices in adapting to new environments. The tendency of life towards a greater complexity of selfhood, a growing complexity of selfhood, a tendency that yields increasing degrees of subjectivity, constitutes the internal or immanent impulse of evolution towards growing self-awareness. So there's a process, it's directed, and it's a growing level of self-awareness, as opposed to a net of life. All organic life is on the same level, and me and the insect I'm looking at are both equal parts of the biosphere. What Bookchin takes from Peter Kropotkin, from Hans Jonas, from Lynn Margulis, is the evolution of life has a logic and directedness. This logic is characterized by growing differentiation, self-awareness, and the potential for freedom, which finds its highest form in humans and their ability for self-reflexivity. In humankind, first nature has become self-reflexive with a potential for freedom and conceptual thought. This is Hegel, this is Fichte, nature in man becomes aware of itself. Okay, but how then does first nature flow into second nature, the biological in the social reality? For Bookchin, humanity's second nature is a result of first nature's inherent revolutionary process. The social sphere emerged from the natural one, and the root of the ecological crisis is exactly when humankind uses its capacity for self-direction and its freedom to go against the logic of life and its evolution towards differentiation and variety. In the history up to now, I'm quoting, that's on page 132 of the article, in the history up to now, social evolution unfolded in the direction of hierarchical, class-oriented, and statist institutions, giving rise to the nation-state, and albeit not inevitably, to capitalist economy. There we are on page 132. Social ecology calls upon us to see that nature and society are interlinked by evolution into one nature that consists of two differentiations. First, or biotic nature, and second, or human nature. Human nature and biotic nature share an evolutionary potential for greater subjectivity and flexibility. Second nature is the way in which human beings, as flexible, highly intelligent primates, inhabit the natural world. That is to say, people create an environment that is most suitable for their mode of existence. In this respect, second nature is no different from the environment that every animal, depending on its abilities, creates as well as adapts to the biophysical circumstances or eco-community in which it must live. On this very simple level, says Murray Bookchin, human beings are in principle doing nothing that differs very much from the survival activities of non-human beings, be it building beaver dams or gopher holes. Okay, what comes in as for Murray Bookchin, the absolute evil, and this comes only in second nature and has nothing to do with first nature, is hierarchy and domination. In the intermediate zone between first and second nature that saw the graded passage of biological evolution into social, the graded passage of biological evolution into social, social evolution began to assume increasingly hierarchical form. Whether this could have been avoided is impossible to say and meaningless to divine. These are the words of Murray Bookchin. In any case, social evolution unfolded in the direction of hierarchical, class-oriented, and statist institution, giving rise to the nation-state and ultimately, albeit not inevitably, to capitalist economy. In our own time, the massive penetration of this economy into society as a whole has produced an even more serious distortion of second nature. You find that on page 132. In the Ecology of Freedom, Bookchin traces this evolution of domination and hierarchy from organic societies via the Greek and Roman civilizations, the Middle Ages, to contemporary capitalism. And his thinking, the figure he uses is very similar to that of Karl Marx, to whom he owes very much, even though he's sometimes distanced himself quite vigorously from Marxism, in that idea that what we have been living up to this day, is the prehistory of mankind, in the sense that until now, humankind has made its history, but made it without consciousness, without in an irrational manner. You remember the famous phrase from Marx in the 18th Brumaire, where he says, "Men make their own history, but they do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living." I think this Last Generation and Fridays for Future would agree with this, even though they may not be reading the 18th Brumaire of Karl Marx. So similarly, Murray Bookchin, he says the historic unconscious must be made conscious. Cutting across the very legacy of domination is another, the legacy of freedom that lives in the daydreams of humanity, in the great ideals and movements, rebellious, anarchic, and Dionysian, that have welled up in all great eras of social transition. So this undercurrent of history, this utopian part, these rebellions, they need to become the new reality principle, taking our destiny consciously into our hands. With Marx, the contradictions that arise from the accumulation of capital. With Murray Bookchin, the contradictions that arise from capitalism's growth imperative are ruining the natural base of human existence. Capitalism, with its imperative to grow or to die, is ruining the natural base of human existence on this planet and may well lead to self-extinction. This is also thought with Hans Jonas, the principle of responsibility, which of course today, with the threat of and with the destruction of biodiversity, has not lost its importance, on the contrary. Both Marx and Bookchin agree that humanity has reached a stage where free society, with Bookchin, a free ecological society, is possible. For both, the development of the means of production are central with the potential of liberation from toil and drastic reduction of work time. Bookchin has written extensively on technology. I'm not going to go into that here today. The central fallacy of modern thought at the root of the ecological crisis is the idea that it is possible to dominate nature. Bookchin is widely quoted, sometimes by persons, or mostly by persons who never read him, with one of his key sentences that he says, the wrong idea that it is possible to dominate nature stems from the very real domination of man by man. Okay, let's see how he argues that. With the rise of hierarchy and human domination, however, the seeds are planted for a belief that nature not only exists as a world apart, but that it is hierarchically organized and can be dominated. And the idea of dominating nature has its primary source in the domination of human by human and the structuring of the natural world into a hierarchical chain of being. A static conception, incidentally, that has no relationship to the evolution of life into increasingly advanced forms of subjectivity and flexibility. So what he's saying is the lion does not know that he's the king of animals, and among the bees, the queen does not know that she's a queen. All those ideas of hierarchy and domination in nature are projections of humans onto nature, which then in turn are being used in a crude reading of Darwin as a justification, hierarchy and domination in nature as a justification for hierarchy and domination in human society, And here the argument is there is no domination, there is no hierarchy in nature. It is a social phenomenon, and it leads to the fallacy to think that nature can be dominated. Okay, and this here we are getting to the core of the, I'm checking, yeah. We are getting to the core of the character of the ecological crisis. It is the normal, everyday way in which we produce, distribute, and dispose of the goods of consumption, the way we build our cities and our infrastructure, that is destroying the natural base of life, of human life on this planet. Chernobyl and Fukushima, the oil spills of supertankers like the Exxon Valdez, profound past, and Deepwater Horizon, even that seems to be a long time ago, the dioxin contamination of Seveso, and the oil spills in the rainforest that are unfortunately still very much with us, and all the other catastrophes of this kind are only the tip of the iceberg. They served for mobilizing people. They have been at the beginning of the modern ecological movement, but they have created a distorted picture as if it were those catastrophes that we have to avoid, as if the problem were those birds which you regularly see in some oil swamp and other kinds of very impressive pictures that Bookchin insists are only the tip of the iceberg. The attention the environmental movement and the media give to these spectacular events threatens to weaken the understanding of the true nature of the ecological crisis. It is not the malfunctions that are the problem, but that this economic system is at its worst when it is functioning well, when industrial agriculture is using ever more land for cultivating genetically modified plants, when oil has to be extracted from ever greater depths, or when now fracking is being used for bringing earth gas to the surface. And then it comes as a big surprise. This is, has been last week in the newspaper, that really liquid gas from fracking that's being transported to Europe, its environmental impact and its CO2 emissions are comparable or even worse than those of coal. Who would have thought? Yeah, the whole discourse on natural gas as being a bridge technology towards an ecological future. So the nature of the ecological crisis is the way in which capitalism, advanced industrial societies intervene into nature, either too deep, genetic engineering, nuclear technologies, or too large in scale, too much. The too much is most obvious in the emissions of CO2, the burning of fossil fuels, mainly by the rich industrialized countries, but increasingly also by the emerging ones that are emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere from power plants, heating systems, cars, airplanes, and everything else that is powered by fossil energy. When Murray Bookchin wrote about that in the 70s and the 80s, that was very much a minority subject. It was a small niche. We started with the Climate Alliance in 1990, and even then we were a decided minority, and us ourselves, we had a very vague understanding of the dimensions and the depths of the climate crisis. Nowadays, we don't need to argue anymore that the climate chaos is a problem. There are very few who would negate that. Okay, how, if that is the nature of the ecological crisis, that of advanced industrial societies is creating the problem, how should we then intervene into nature? I mean, here, Bookchin still had to argue at the time in the 70s, 80s against a sizable part of the ecological movement that was dreaming of wilderness, of not intervening, that the less we intervene into nature, the better it is. And the idea, for example, to move the whole North American population to the two coasts and give all the land in between back to wilderness, Earth first, deep ecology. I mean, this nowadays doesn't play very much a role in the debate, and it's a little outmoded. But if you wonder why is he arguing so extensively against this position, it was important at the time. And at the time, Bookchin was not very popular with the environmental movement in his advocacy of human intervention into nature, which he considers inherent and inevitable. And he writes to argue that this intervention should not occur is utterly, and there's another adjective, obfuscatory. Since humanity's second nature is not simply an external imposition on biology's first nature, but is the result of first nature's inherent evolutionary process. The capacity of humans to intervene in nature is itself a result of the evolutionary process of first nature, and brings with it not only the right of humans to intervene in nature, but the duty to do so. The question is only how. What is at issue in humanity's transformation of nature is whether its practice is consistent with an objective ecological ethics that is rationally developed. I mean, those are pretty strong words. An objective ecological ethics that is rationally developed. A humanity that failed to see that it is potentially nature rendered self-conscious and self-reflexive would separate itself from nature morally as well as intellectually. There's no road back from second to first nature any more than second nature as it is now constituted, can rescue the biosphere from destruction with technological fixes and political reforms. He's advocating a form of intervention that does not elude itself, that you can dominate nature, bioengineering solutions, for example, but that follows the logic of natural evolution itself. Okay, I'm about to conclude what I know very little about, and I'm hoping to hear something from you in our debate, is what in several books and articles, most recently From Urbanization to Cities, The Politics of Democratic Municipalism, Bookchin lays out his urban ecological critique of the reified and dehumanized forms of modern urbanism, and develops a vision of libertarian municipalist or confederal municipalist politics. Libertarian municipalism, confederal municipalism. Spreading urban areas are to be restructured into a mosaic of diverse self-governing neighborhoods. They will be governed by local assemblies or neighborhood councils where citizens decide directly on matters affecting their lives. The referendum, Paula Wiegenau. talked about in her introduction. These democratic forms would allow for the community to make decisions in a way that is ecologically informed and socially just. The connection between Murray Bookchin's social ecology, which I have been talking about, and his vision of libertarian municipalism are obvious, and I would be delighted if we find an occasion to discuss this very important part of his work in a future session. I'm glad if today I was able to show how his theory of social ecology is eminently relevant today. Or let me make a final note on why I think that Murray Bookchin is relevant to the ecological discourse today. We already saw in the two quotes I put at the beginning of this lecture, the one from Pope Francis, Laudato Si, and the other from The Ecology of Freedom by Murray Bookchin, that when I read Laudato Si, that came out in 2015, I thought that somehow Murray Bookchin from above had a hand in writing that document. We can assume that the the big group of scientists that worked on that document, or we cannot exclude that maybe one or two or some of them have read The Ecology of Freedom. But if you read a sentence from Laudato Si like the following: the human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together. We cannot adequately combat environmental degradation unless we attend to causes related to human and social degradation. If you read a sentence like that from Laudato Si, you cannot help thinking that this is very close to Murray Bookchin's social ecology. Nowadays, for example, we are conscious of the disproportionate and unruly growth of many cities, writes the Pope, which have become unhealthy to live in. Nowadays, for example, we are conscious of the disproportionate and unruly growth of many cities, which have become unhealthy to live in, not only because of pollution caused by toxic emissions, but also as a result of urban chaos, poor transportation, and visual pollution, I like that, and noise. Many cities are huge, inefficient structures, excessively wasteful of energy and water. Neighborhoods, even those recently built, are congested, chaotic, and lacking in sufficient green space. We were not meant to be inundated by deprived of physical contact with nature. I mean, that's still Laudato Si. A nearly identical formulation you find in The Ecology of Freedom, where Murray Bookchin talks about those materials, glass, steel, cement, that go against the logic of evolution, and that they simplify and render monotonous our physical environment. And the relevance of Murray Bookchin for the ecological discourse today, one publication which has received fairly wide attention recently is The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Holgrave. They, two anthropologists, which provide kind of a very good scientific, provocative basis for the thought of Murray Bookchin. They say that the general thesis is, as societies become larger, more complex, wealthy, and civilized, they inevitably become less equal. So the hunters and gatherers lived in small mobile bands that were casually egalitarian and democratic. But this relative equality in the dominant picture, disappeared with settlement and farming, which required the management of labor and land, and the emergence of early cities and ultimately states demanded even steeper hierarchies, and with them leaders and administrators, the division of labor and social classes. And Graeber and Holgrave questioned this common assumption that human equality and freedom have to be traded for progress, showing the sheer variety and hybridity of early human societies. Hierarchical and non-hierarchical, equal in some respects and not in others. And that goes even, as they show, for large cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants, where some kind of libertarian municipalism reigned. What Bookchin is widely quoted for is him being taken up by the Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan, who studied the ecology of freedom in his solitary confinement in a Turkish prison and was reportedly impressed by the work, consequently issuing a manifesto titled Declaration of Democratic Confederalism in Kurdistan, which called on the Kurdistan Workers' Party to implement the ideas of social ecology. In his 5-volume Manifesto for Democratic Civilization, whose 3rd volume is tellingly titled, in a nod to Bookchin, The Sociology of Freedom, Öcalan too provides his own rather ambitious sketch of the emergence of hierarchy and domination and their subsequent development over the course of 5,000 years history. Like Bookchin, Öcalan argues that when man began to enslave his brother, he also began to enslave nature. In Rojava, a region comprising parts of the north and northeast of Syrian territory, there has been created a political entity opposed to the capitalist nation state. It's the experiment of a democratic, decentralized, and non-hierarchical society based on feminist ecology, cultural pluralism, cooperative sharing economy ideas, and participatory politics. And we wish all the best to this experiments. There are several interesting documentaries on Rojava, among others by the BBC. I'm the wrong person to assess the influence Bookchin might have had or continues to have on urban planning and urbanization, how much Bookchin's critique of urbanization and the role of cities in environmental degradation have influenced urban planning and community organizing. His advocacy for decentralization and human-scaled urban environments of sustainable cities, clean buildings, and urban agriculture, today, it seems to me, has become pretty much commonplace in the logic of Bookchin's thinking, but only, I guess, to a small degree because of him. I mean, that's very hard to assess how much those arguments, figures, theories have to do with Bookchin that nowadays have entered pretty much mainstream ecological thinking, not mainstream thinking, mainstream ecological thinking. Like if you look at the climate justice movement that brings together the fight against climate chaos and the adaptation to the changes that are already happening with social justice goals, that too presents an integration of ecological and social issues. There are two in the climate justice movement. There may not be that many who have read Bookchin, but their thinking and their actions follow his ideas. So far, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karl, for this very, very rich, interesting lecture. I suppose that there are questions. So we have also someone on the line. So just raise your hand if you are online, and if you are not online, raise your physical hands. Okay. And you have one. Okay, great.
Yes.
Let me just check if mic is working or if we need to move. Let's try with the question.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Testing.
No,
Yeah.
maybe if
Yeah.
or maybe you have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, and if you are kind, please
Yes.
slowly and clearly. The audio is works, but it's not perfect.
Okay. I just want to thank you for a very rich lecture, and to introduce the relationship between nature system and our social system, how to co-working together. And you also introduced that some of the nature characters of the natural system, that it doesn't have any hierarchical system. They don't have domination. That's something from our projection, and but that is something for the first nature. But since we have moved to the second nature, even the techno nature, since we observe quite a lot in Switzerland. So what type of practice does this type of nature have? I mean, it's not the same nature anymore. So from your knowledge, and how those systems work, and how can we work with those new nature?
Let's see if I understood the question. You are
Yes.
correct. I mean, ideally, what Murray Bookchin envisions, and I think it's also in the article which you might have read, is that with a free ecological society, first and second nature would flow together into one nature. That's his utopia. The existence of domination in second nature in our societies, of hierarchies of domination, puts our societies into opposition to the logic and to the evolution of first nature. And this has happened for tens of thousands of years. Today, with the development of the means of production and with the development of the technological development, this destructive effects of hierarchy and domination on the interaction of humans with the natural base threatens to produce large-scale destruction of the natural base of human life that may even end into the self-extinction of the species. So the new quality is not that man intervenes destructively on nature. That has always happened, has also always happened. There have been societies that have been living more in harmony with nature, and others that have been living in a more destructive relationship with nature. The Italian peninsula at some time was covered with woods. What is happening is that today the ecological society in some way has become an imperative to prevent large-scale destruction of the biological natural base of our own lives through climate chaos, through the destruction of biodiversity. So that's the new quality that requires an ecological society, which does not mean that, and that's a wrong reading, be it of Karl Marx, be it of Murray Bookchin, that there's anything automatic or necessary in the rise of a free society and the rise of an ecological society. Again, that's a potential. Yeah, it's an objective potential, and it is our there the ethical dimension comes in, and it is our duty to give those forces that have been driving natural evolution, to give them space in social evolution to preserve the chances for a decent life for future generations, what today we call sustainability. Yeah? The ethical dimension, which you also find with Hans Jonas, he argues that extensively, is to say we do not have the right to self-extinction, right? Because you could say, well, yes, it's a pretty destructive society we live in, but that's somehow how the social evolution has worked its way. And so there's one species that's going to extinguish itself. And so what? I mean, nature will continue to live. The planet will be just fine. Another 300 years and 400 and nothing, no trace will be left of this temporary disturbance of the biosphere by one species that extinguish itself. Huh? Why should I do anything for future generations? They never did anything for me. And here, so the ecological society for Murray Bookchin is a potential that is necessary for stopping the destruction of the natural base. He is convinced, and he argues extensively, that this is not going to happen within capitalism. There's no green growth. And his alternative, which we did not talk about today, we might I would welcome another occasion, is the organization in small communities, confederal libertarian municipalism. That's a whole other argument he develops, which I did not dwell on. Did I answer some of the question?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Maybe just to rephrase briefly the question of techno-nature, from what Karl is saying, you have a potential in natural dynamics, wherever they are. If they are inside the techno-nature, there's the potential still.
Okay.
No? Other questions?
Also, I think there was a question online as well. So there's that.
No, it's Ana Carlo. I think so.
Yeah, I have. So first of all, thank you very much.
And maybe Elena, I think we have to move in front, because I guess I cannot connect this weird object.
Also, you can see.
Wait, I just make.
Can you hear me now? No. Can you hear me now?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, perfect. I can sit here or?
Perfect.
I will just sit here for a moment.
That's perfect.
Okay. I really like in front. Yes, I'm there.
Okay.
No, so I have to use this or not? Yes. No, thank you very much. It was very inspiring. I wanted maybe if you could take a moment to expand on the notion of freedom, which you mentioned throughout the presentation. Because reading the book you mentioned, The Ecology of Freedom, there is a passage where he explains basically that the concept of freedom was non-existent in organic societies, and that it was actually a word that was without any sense for, let's say, pre-literate populations, which is also a position that is very present in the book that you mentioned by Greber and Bengro, The History of Everything. And and I think that the interesting point is that basically this type of societies, they did not have the way to define freedom, and that in fact, let's say freedom appeared when unfreedom, as Bookchin calls it, started to appear. So in a negative sense, let's say, so in the sense of freedom from something. And basically, I would like maybe, I don't know if you could take a few minutes to elaborate a bit more on this notion.
In the ecology of freedom, Bookchin dwells on the rise of hierarchy and domination. He argues why that I said that has no justification in the in first nature, in the natural sphere. Don't go away. I may not answer your question, and you'll have to see if I succeeded. Because I'm not sure if that I answer what you asked. Let me try. No domination, no hierarchy in first nature. It evolves in second nature. He follows it through the organic societies and through history. Says, did it have to evolve? We don't know. It's a moot question. It did, yeah. And juxtaposes the natural evolution, where he says that's his reading of the natural evolution, based on Hans Jonas, on Lynn Margulis, and more recently on research that has been done after his death, that we can see something like intentionality, self-determination, subjectivity in the very earliest forms of life, right? And that you can reconstruct the natural evolution as a evolution towards ever greater spaces of subjectivity, of self-determination, of freedom. And this reaches its highest form on this planet in the human species, and our potential and our obligation, if we want to live in a co-productive relationship with nature, to abolish domination, to abolish hierarchy in favor of a free society. So that's his utopian vision of where we should be, what we should be striving for. What kind of, there we get into a difficult debate, what kind of forms this freedom should be taking. Bookchin, of course, has the problem which all social ecological thinkers have if they try to imagine a future society. I mean, Karl Marx has been very cautious there, and Bookchin follows in that logic, that to anticipate what the forms will be in which people live their freedom once they have the freedom for self-determination, not within some small niches, but as a guiding principle of society, that would be pretentious to know. If we could kind of define what freedom is for people that live in a free society, it wouldn't be freedom. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Other questions?
Yes.
Let's see if the distance is fine.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, related to the question that was done previously, and also to
No, the audio is terrible. It was better before. Or you have to speak slowly.
I was just wondering, from also from the conversation, what the large scale, what the big scale is, related to. Do you hear me?
What is?
This one. I will just try with the other microphone. Do you hear me better?
No, but I hear you. It's just a little rimbomba.
Maybe you have to close.
I was just wondering what the large scale or the big scale is, for you. I was just thinking while you were speaking as well that now also nowadays even small actions from different entities in the world, they then they could be considered as the big scale or the large scale intervention. So what, in your opinion, is the large scale or the big scale that you are referring to while explaining? Thank you.
Want to say what is a
Let's see if I understood your question. Are you talking about the scale of intervention into nature?
Yes.
Since Bookchin developed his thoughts on how to intervene in nature, a lot of theoretical but also practical work has been done. La Chimica Dolce, the soft chemistry, I don't think you call it that. The idea that you should stay as close to the logics and to the processes that you find in nature, be it in your interventions on the on first nature. And that does not mean small is beautiful, the famous slogan by Schumacher. There, Murray Bookchin writes a little polemically, small is neither beautiful nor ugly, it's simply small. So it's not a question of dimension, it's the question of the logic in which you intervene. And if that should follow the natural conditions you are working with and the natural processes you try to stay as close to as possible, those solutions those interventions find their limits in that principle. I mean, you would be intervening where I'm now in the Upper Tiber Valley differently from the region of Lausanne. You would intervene on the coast differently than in the Po plains, etc. Yeah? So the whole debate on bio regions, on what are the units of units of intervention. Murray Bookchin says it depends on the situation, it depends on the natural conditions, it depends on the interaction between free, self-determined communities and the natural environment they live in. See, if you base your vision on self-determination of communities, then you have to leave a lot of space for what those communities will consider a good interaction with their natural environment. You're not going to tell them what they have to do or what they should be doing. It's the and I mean, many of these ideas and principles today are on paper or in the debate accepted in the general discourse, what happens is that in practice they are being disregarded. We all know that you need more urban green. We all know that we need passageways for fresh air into the cities. We all know that cars are a terrible idea in the city, etc. Yeah? And still, a fair part of development is going into the opposite direction. And this is then a whole other debate how Bookchin imagines taking away the power from the nation state, taking away the power from the economic interests that today are dominating not so much the discourse, that too greenwashing, but dominating the practice, which largely continues to be destructive for our natural environment. And also one subject where he found himself in contradiction with a large part of the ecology movement is the role of technology. And there also the debate if highly developed technology is conceivable with relatively small self-organized units, if that doesn't mean necessarily that we have to give up complex high-tech solutions. Murray Bookchin contradicts, and I'm very much in favor with him that these wonderful, and to some extent, the development of technology itself, confirms his argument in the sense that very sophisticated technological solutions nowadays, you can buy them in the store here on the corner, and they cost very little, right? Chips to govern the heating system in your house, which used to cost hundreds of euros. Nowadays, you get them for 25 euros, and they work wonderfully. So he has a positive view of technology to liberate us from the necessity of toil, to increase labor productivity, to reduce the necessary work time. There he's very much in agrees with other thinkers like Herbert Marcuse or André Gorz or others.
Yes, Anna.
Hi,
Please.
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and for these discussions, which are extremely relevant, especially, I would say, well, they have always been, but today I think they find also some allies. And indeed, my question will be, I have two questions, actually. One will be, what are, if this falls within your work, what are the points of contact or interrelationships between Bookchin and the degrowth movement?
Mm-hmm.
And the second question would be, since we can see that this has been a long process, because most of the ideas that we perceive today as new have actually been there for at least 50 years, what would be in your position today? What would be the key messages that you would give to future architects and urban planners, like, or current one, like the students of the MAS?
Thank you. The second question I must pass. I said it in my lecture. That would be a debate I would enjoy very much to hear from you, what you hear, what thoughts of Bookchin might be relevant, and there we would have to look at other parts of his writing we didn't look at today. Today I was trying to show how he connects first and second nature, which I think has a direct relevance for somebody who does planning, be it of urban areas or of natural environments, in a very general sense, how that then applies concretely. Me as a sociologist, I'm a little bit outside of my field. Bookchin and degrowth is a very interesting question. The argument in that form did not exist, or if it did already exist in the beginning of this century, then he didn't deal with it explicitly. Murray Bookchin was convinced, and he argues that in many parts of his work, that there's no chance for capitalism not to grow. Growth is the is the necessary condition for capitalism to thrive. There's nothing like a stationary. I mean, he more dealt with this idea of a stationary economy daily. Yeah? Ecological economics. Can we stop growing and go into a stationary economy where we then step by step ecologize that production? And my book just said no way. And nowadays we have that the discussion was taken up by people like Paul Hawken and natural capitalism, which now is also 20 years old, but Paul Hawken has continued to work on that subject, and others. I think what we are seeing is that all the arguments in favor of something like green growth that has then to do with decoupling the produced wealth from the use of resources. We live better using less energy, using less raw materials. That up to now, there is no sign that this is going to work. I mean, the attempt to increase wealth and to increase well-being, reducing the emissions of CO2. There are, of course, wonderful examples of degrowth in limited fields when you look at some specific field, but there are growth continues, CO2 emissions are rising. If wealth doesn't increase, there's a panic. This year, the social product will fall 0.5% in Germany. That's terrible. That's a catastrophe. So I'm afraid what my Bookchin would have said is degrowth, nice effort, but you are on the wrong track. Capitalism, as long as the production is controlled by large companies that produce for profit, capitalism has to grow. So if you don't, and if you change that, if you really institute, as he argues, libertarian municipalism, then we don't have to talk anymore about degrowth. The problem is solved. Yeah. So trying to change a central symptom of advanced industrial societies, the growing use of resources. Trying to change that is kind of trying to cure one very important symptom, but that's neither at the root of the problem. It is, and he would have a problem to see, and I have a problem to see how you go about it. Degrowth. Yeah.
I just jump in to respond on something that actually I agree with the fact that within a capitalist society, slowing down or increasing wealth or decoupling is actually not possible. And indeed, I think one of the key messages, then of course, degrowth has been used by different people, but the way in which kind of the degrowth scholars are trying to use it today and push for is indeed a strong critique of capitalism, and it's indeed prosperity without growth. It is indeed the idea that we cannot continue growing and finding pockets of, and I think that there are interesting experiments, as you've also mentioned, in some sectors, and in particular the housing sector is also starting a bit experimenting in that direction. But yeah, so I just wanted to respond for that.
Right, the degrowth movement has brought up many radical, important ideas. The problem is that the process, the real social and economic process, is going into the opposite direction, right? I mean, decoupling doesn't work. The rebound effect. I'm following that debate not so much by a representative of degrowth, but of green growth, which is Ralf Fuchs, a German thinker, and I simply cannot see how it's going to work. There's a critique, yeah, there we are right. How do we go about it? Bookchin would say you have to start from the social organization, from his proposal libertarian municipalism. Yeah, you don't try to cure the symptom by consuming less, going on a bike instead of using a car. That's wonderful. I mean, we are doing Climate Alliance campaigns on city cycling, soft mobility, but I'm afraid that in Bookchin's view, all of that are nice attempts, but they are not going to solve the problem.
Yeah. Thank you. I will let the others jump in, but I just want to say, since you mentioned green growth, like degrowth and green growth have opposite positions. Like they don't believe in decoupling at all, degrowth actually. And I think it aligns with the point of Bookchin, like the idea of imagining a society where less is needed, or towards efficiency and towards not simply substituting cars with electric cars, or trying to have the same standards and same type of growth, but without emissions. So I think it is aligned, but I will let other people jump in now. Thanks for this discussion.
I'll just make one comment. I'm very much aware that green growth and degrowth are on the opposite parts of the spectrum. But I mean, Bookchin, when he came out with post-scarcity anarchism, he was quite unusual in that he says nature is abundant, yeah, and post-scarcity, abundance. The problem is not sufficiency, I don't think he used the word. I'll have to see if he ever uses the word sufficiency. They all might make part of the solution: sufficiency, efficiency, more efficient technologies, and make do with less. But when communities can decide on how they want to live in an ecological exchange with their natural environment, then this is going to show what are the limits or where they have to do with less, but not that an ecological life necessarily has to be more confined.
I fully agree.
That, I mean, like right now in our backyard, the nut tree. I mean, those nuts, they are falling, they are falling, they are falling. We don't know what to kilos of nuts. Yeah, this tree isn't stopping. Every morning there's another 20 keys lying under there. How did he do that? So post-scarcity, abundance, living within limits that are not objective, but have to do with the concrete interaction between the community and the natural environment. Yeah.
There are no questions. I have one question. Thank you very much. So I have a couple of questions about first of all, thanks for bringing back the question of logics, that nature has logics, is the subjectivity you were describing. And my thinking is about the non-living part of the planet, because it seems that the logics, that the presence of logics is related to this teleological possibility, but nevertheless also the non-living environment has logics. So I think that here we can expand the idea of subjectivity, not just to the living organism, but also to the non-living matter. Let's say there is an important group of scholars that are working on the idea that even the non-living nevertheless has rights and has a subjectivity and express logics. And I think that this, I don't know exactly what is the position of Bookchin on this relation between living and non-living, but in my opinion, logics are present also in the non-living part. And there is maybe a kind of implicit teleological also story to be told in a way. There is an evolution of the mountains, there is an evolution of the rivers, etc. The second point, which is not really a question, is that, but a little bit maybe, is the importance of an ethical position. Because even these libertarian municipalities, of course, they will not escape from the logic of domination. No, why they should escape? Why they should be different from what has already happened? So, in fact, the point for me is not to establish libertarian municipality, but is to understand individually this need of an ethic position. Because then the forms of organization, the form of government maybe can be also different. There is not only one possibility, but the fundamental point is the way in which individually we accept to be inside this, ethical approach, without which you can invent whatever you like. You can invent libertarian municipalities, but they will never work because they will be simply another terrain for fight and battle. For example, the position against the state I can understand in the moment which he was writing, but today, the state, in my opinion, can be also read as a dike, a protection against global powers that are really worse than the national state. So I think that we have to update maybe, we have to expand some of those concepts in a way that they are not becoming too narrow or too idealistic in a way, too simple also in a way, knowing that nevertheless you have to go through a change of each individual, that there is nothing you can organize from above. At a certain moment, you go to the individual, and it is the individual that has to take a certain ethical approach. I don't know what you think about my reflection on such a big themes.
Let's see if I understood, and correct me or help me. Bookchin argues his thinking starts with the transition from the anorganic to the organic. He there follows very much in the steps of Hans Jonas. And while what I seem to understand is that you are saying, why start there? A graded development, we could also go back with that chain of development and include the non-organic environment. Is that what you are saying?
Yes.
Think like
with the same arguments, including with the same arguments of having logics and a kind of a teleological parcours, let's say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like Aldo Leopold, think like a mountain.
Exactly.
Bookchin, however, insists that we are talking about, and this is very debatable. I mean, there are important arguments against this way of seeing things. Like Stephen Jay Gould, the archaeologist, evolutionist, who was one of the brightest, or who was one of the brightest in the field. He says, if you look at evolution, if it was a film, yeah, I mean, that was still before digital, and you can wind it back and you start it all over again. You wind it back 2.5 billion years, and then you start all over again. The result would be completely different. Each time, evolution has nothing teleological, nothing directed. This what we see now has been the outcome. If we would start the process all over again, there would be a different outcome. Murray Bookchin doesn't think so, and of course, neither do Hans Jonas or others. He thinks about a directed process, a teleological process, a logic of the evolution of life. And of course, if you want to bring that, go into the realm of the anorganic, you certainly can, I would have to think how you would construct the argument. I mean, James Lovelock did that with his Gaia hypothesis, right? That the whole planet as a single being that auto-regulates itself. Bookchin didn't agree very much with Jim Lovelock or with all those pictures. He says that's metaphoric thinking, that's fine for poetry, but it doesn't help if you want to create an ecological society. Let me, I mean, how, if you want to include the anorganic world, I mean, what role would that play in your argument?
The same role as the living organism, in the sense of being subjects Because otherwise you arrive to the paradox that you are saving, I don't know, a river just because the living organism can find water to drink. Why I would like to say that I save the river? Because it is a river. Stop. I don't need to find further, reasons. There is something in the subject. And I think that this is really where the deep ecology that he criticizes is going a little bit further. There is a right to exist. And I think this is very important. In that sense, I can recognize the same type of logics, specific logics, rationalities, also in the non-living organism. And they have the right to exist, not because they are the living organism, but because they exist.
Yeah, that's an important ongoing debate. The right of nature. Do trees have standing, right, in court?
Yes.
And
but I think it's not necessary, let's say, to go further. I think that is important that we consider both, and that we are working. I think personally in this direction of expanding the idea of subject also to the non-living environment. But maybe I'm more interested in my second question,
which was the ethical approach. No, say the.
Yes, the fact that I'm not very much convinced by this idea of libertarian municipalities, because I don't see why they should be different, working differently from other libertarian municipalities we had also in the past, and why in principle they should be better than other forms of government. What I think is that there is something very important in the ethical approach that each individual has to develop to participate to this project, to this political project, let's say. And I ask myself if the question of anarchism is fundamentally related to this, to the role of the individual, not the role of municipalities or I don't know what else, but I think there is something related to the individual that makes anarchism different from other positions, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Is the centrality of the individual, no? Differently from other types of more communitarian, more collective type of positions.
Yeah. Murray Bookchin and anarchism is a subject that is not simple. He called himself an anarchist from the mid-50s onward, and most of the time we discussed and worked together. His understanding was that he was an anarchist. Then he got into a debate about lifestyle anarchism, into a pretty polemic debate in which he then finally said, I'm not an anarchist, I'm a municipal communitarian. He did not use the concept of anarchist anymore for himself. I don't think that is very important. I would prefer to look at the contents here. I mean, he's very strong in insisting that there is an objectively grounded ethics in nature. That's something to be discussed, and that this has consequences for social organization. There he trusts in a rational society that has to do with, if people are free to express themselves, then they will find together solutions that are good for all of them. There is a link to another of my teachers, Jürgen Habermas, and his assumption that communicative action, if it happens without constraints, without domination, without hierarchy, it will lead to a rational solution. And if communication is deformed by domination or by hierarchy, it will take revenge on the community. He's talking about the, that's now difficult in English, the zwanglose Zwang, the better argument, the unconstrained restraining of the better argument, the uncoercive coercion of the better argument. So, I mean, it's the centrality of the individual, which you talk about, needs some social structure in which it can thrive and develop. And that's why populism how then those communities live their freedom, they will decide. How else do you want to construct any kind of freedom of the individual if you don't have some idea of the social structure in which it could thrive and develop?
Sorry, I know a structure where?
I mean, it need not be libertarian municipalism the answer, but how would you construct the liberty of the individual, the centrality of the individual, if not within a social structure that permits free development of the individual?
I agree, but my point was, is this necessarily leading to be against the national state, when today the national state is, in many cases at least, trying to put an argin, a dike towards other type of powers? I'm not sure that the single communities can resist this type of movements, for example.
Now here, Murray Bookchin is very clear, and that's coincides with my own thinking. The nation state is the original sin of modernity. The nation state is everything we do not want. And to confront the nation state in a power struggle is not going to get us anywhere, says Bookchin. What we need to do is take away step by step the power from the nation state in a parallel structure. But that's a whole different argument from what we were talking about, social ecology. He has a very similar argument. I tried to develop that in my PhD thesis. For me, things started taking unfortunate direction with the defeat of the peasants in the Peasant War of 1525. From then on, we have the rise of the nation state, centralization, bureaucracy, standing army, educational system. This is what got us into the terrible situation we are in. So any liberatory, emancipatory development needs to move away from the nation state.
Yeah. Okay. I see that there is a Elvira Pietrobono.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the lecture and also for the debate. I will maybe say something not so interesting, but since freedom has become a slogan nowadays for capitalistic culture to prosper, don't you think you, Paula, too, that we should update the notion of freedom to maybe the freedom to choose on who or which to depend and to relate. So drastically change the point of view from freedom of the individual, of freedom of the relation, and the freedom to choose, because nowadays we are not free to choose on which to relate and to depend. And so I'm thinking on dependency more than on freedom nowadays, like an important concept to explore. What do you think about that?
First, let's see if I understood thank you for the question, what you are saying. You are saying need to update the notion of freedom, and it would be more the freedom of relation than what? Than the freedom from...
Just freedom. I would say to be free to choose on which to depend, because it's part of the human condition to depend on something. And this is maybe the message of ecology. And so to change the point of view, to say we depend on something, let's be free to choose. And so this leads to a community project, in my point of view, and maybe in yours too. And I guess the idea of the state too, or to think in another way, also the role of the state. But we in African culture, let's say, it's a big thing, African culture, but the attention is on the relation more than on freedom, because we already accepted we are not free. And so let's think about how we can relate and depend one to another. In the first place, one another human being, and then to nature. But nature is just another agency in this connection and in this network. And so this goes to the idea of decentralization, but it becomes more concrete, I think. Well.
Okay. When Bookchin talks about freedom, he and I tried to show that in my presentation. He sees a development in the progression of life from simple life forms to ever more complex life forms, of a growing variety and a growing diversity, and growing freedom in the sense of the self-awareness and self-reflexivity in humans. And for him, freedom would mean to create an ecological, to create a society in which each individual can live this diversity and live this variety freely. And what forms that then takes concretely? Again, we do not need to define the forms of relationships, the form of the social forms people relate to, the personal, the sexual identity, what have you. We don't need to define that. We can leave that to those individuals that have the freedom to determine their own lives. Self-determination. So it would be, I mean, it would be fascinating. Unfortunately, we cannot discuss that with Murray Bookchin anymore, how he would have argued in that whole identity politics debate we are involved in nowadays. but I guess his answer would have been along the lines of what I have been trying to say. We don't have to define freedom, we have to create conditions in which people can define for themselves what it is that for them is freedom.
Thank you.
Good. That's a fantastic conclusion.
Maybe
Thank you.
another question.
There's another question?
But it's not again.
Then I think it will be the last. Because I think it also that you have to find the end.
No, I was actually inspired by Elvira's question. So, because I thought it was interesting what Elvira said on the fact that actually what today we conceive as freedom is in a certain sense a voluntary exploitation of the self, which is done through the capitalist system, and this is really the opposite of the self-determination that Bookchin talks about. And I wanted to refer to an author, maybe for Elvira, but I think that Ludwig, of course, knows him, who is Byung-Chul Han, the Korean, I think he's a philosopher, but also a theologist who is naturalized German. And he talks about the fact that nowadays domination actually comes forward when freedom and surveillance coincide, which I think is a very interesting thought and just a note. And then I have another question which is not linked to this one, so I'm not sure if I can go for
Please.
okay. Because we just going quickly back to subjectivity, so the question before the question on freedom, and that since we discussed this notion of subjectivity of both organic and inorganic matter, so also river, air, minerals, and so on. So in this context of the subjectivity, I was thinking that maybe we have to reflect also on the notion of resources, which is of course not this ever-present word in the environmentalist vocabulary, but in the perspective of subjectivity, the notion of resources actually does not question domination. I mean, it's a word which is still a hierarchical word, and I was just thinking if maybe this is also a terminology on which to reflect, that resources still means a certain exploitation, and since we're talking about subjectivity, it does not fit in a certain sense.
I didn't get two things. The one was the Korean philosopher. Who is he?
Byung-Chul Han.
Wuhan.
Byung-Chul Han, like his most known book, I would say, it's translated as Capitalism and Death Drive, something like this. And he really reflects on the notion of freedom and the notion of domination. So I thought maybe it would be interesting to read it also through the perspective that Bookchin puts forward. But that was just a comment to, let's say, add something to Elvira's question. And then the second part was more on the inadequacy of the term resources in the context of the subjectivity.
I'm having a problem to understand. The first part with self and capitalism, was there a question in it? I mean, I understood your statement, but was there a question?
No, I just wanted to follow up on Elvira's comment. And then my question is actually on the resources.
On? No, if you speak slowly and clearly.
Here it's better, or?
Yeah, better.
Yeah, okay. No, it was on let's say how in a context where we're speaking about subjectivity of organic and inorganic matter. And I was just thinking that if we talk about resources, it's a term that it's in a way inadequate because it implies also domination and implies also hierarchy. So I was thinking, I'm not sure if in Bookchin's work there is also a reflection on the use of the term resources.
Yeah, thank you. There you are. Understood you loud and clear. I mean, the whole issue of which Professor Viganò brought up, the subjectivity of the organic, of the non-organic, the evolution, that's an interesting subject. I'll have to think about it some more. Until now, that was for me metaphysical thinking, mainly with the Gaia hypothesis of Jim Lovelock. Murray Bookchin uses the term resources only and consistently in a critical way and negatively as an instrumental relationship with nature, to degrade it to resources. And one would have to see if not in that picture of a natural environment that is developing in its own logic, how to insert a discussion on rivers and their rights, or rivers as a living organism. The subjectivity he sees in a developmental way, and that is different from hierarchy. I don't know if I answered there your question, but the graded development into ever more complex and forms of life and a growing subjectivity has nothing to do with hierarchy, that we have different capacities of us humans, of subjective awareness and of self-reflexivity, has no hierarchical implications, but it does bring with it an ethics and a responsibility. I mean, that's not all that simple argument, but very much opposed to, like in deep ecology, putting us into a web of life where every living organism more or less has the same rights, which then at the time with the Earth First movement sessions also resulted in an argument that also, of course, viruses and bacteria have their rights to survival, and we should respect their rights as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
There was a less consistent conclusion than after the question before, but I'll look into it.
It's great in any case. So I think that we can close the seminar. I also understood, Karl, that maybe you will be available for a second round. We will see maybe in some months, touching other aspects of Bookchin thinking, and also maybe enlarging to your personal counter project that nevertheless I think will be very interesting also for students to listen.
Would be a
and
pleasure.
did you take my book when you were there? Okay, so read it and you can see about.
I've been reading in the book. This is a nice challenge. I mean, to feel your way in a very different way of looking and arguing. I find it fascinating, but it's not easy for me.
Okay, we will discuss another time. So thank you very much, and I think that
thank you very much.
Yeah, with this we conclude. Just maybe with a small apology, because in the slide I showed today, your name has been spelled wrong, so we will correct this. Fortunately, in all others communication, it was correct.
I've seen very many variations on my name. This one is a pretty.
That was very, I mean, architecturally oriented.
Schibel is not bad.
That was really for architects.
The great German architect.
Exactly.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.